Welcome back. Today we are going to take a look at LETSHUOER's Mystic 8. So we take a look at this one up close. It is an all-metal build. It is a very fancy design. That faceplate with the lines on is actually inset, and you have this cat, this almost 3D cat on the side, and the inset faceplate, metal bottom. Yeah, it is very nice. It actually fits quite well. I would call it a little bit of an ear hugger, and everything is black here, so it's not really showing up as well as I thought it did in my head. But yeah, this actually does fit quite snug in your ear, and I thought it had a pretty great fit. It says Mystic 8 on the side. So yeah, I think it's the other thing to notice, which we can't really see. There are 4 tubes, and we can't really get a good look at them, but they do have 4 audio channel, or it's 4-way crossover essentially, and they've got 4 tubes running into the nozzle, but you can't really get a good look at them. The cable is kind of a head scratcher for me. I think LETSHUOER has actually done some quite nice cables. This one I wasn't really sure. It actually reminds me of Effect Audio. I think the rubberized 8-core is something that I don't know. It kind of struck me as odd because it's quite thin. Not really what I was expecting. I was kind of expecting a really nice modular, and this is kind of a thinner style black 8-core. So nice cable, just not what I was expecting. They actually changed up the case as well. So they used to have a screw on top on this style. Now there's kind of a rubber, just kind of a snap-on, which is another interesting thing. But metal cases are always kind of nice to have around. So we'll move these things out of the way, and we will take a quick look at the graph. And I will say, I'm not going to talk too much about the graph. There's not a whole lot there. It's kind of a very neutral style set, so kind of a lowered bass shelf, more of a neutral bass shelf, and again, kind of an easy rise into the upper mids, and then kind of a downslope into the treble. And the whole thing is sort of designed to be end-to-end neutral, really, really focus on the mids, and that's kind of exactly what you would see on the graph. And we'll talk about this a little bit, the bass shelf, and if you are used to Harman, this is the Harman bass shelf, and you can kind of see this one is quite lowered, quite relaxed compared to that one, and all the space in between them has implications on the music that you listen to and what you prefer. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So let's kind of get into it, and we'll kind of say what is it right at the beginning. It is a neutral style, precise 8 balanced armature, Sonian and nulls. I think it's 4 and 4. And I'm going to use the word precise because I don't want to imply that this is an analytical style set or a super technical set. It certainly has great text, but I wouldn't say that is the part that is forward on this set. And I wouldn't actually say it's analytical at all. I think that the Sonians actually give it this more of a refined edge, kind of more, very much along the lines of what Sonians sound like, as opposed to the hard edge analytical sets. It's not like that at all. So I'll say it's precise is more than saying it's tech-led or analytical, and so I tried to avoid using that style of wording. But this one really comes down to exactly this. How do you prefer your neutral? This is going to be the absolute decision factor on Mystic 8. No one's going to really say there's a tuning fault to it, but the tuning works better on some genres than other due to its neutrality, and that is almost everything on this one. And I'll say for most people, they would agree that neutral brings out spectacularly transparent mids and vocals. That's exactly what happens on Mystic 8. Very, very well, spectacularly expressive vocals. I think that exactly describes what Mystic 8 is good at. But the second question is, how do you like the accompanying mid-bass and sub-bass? The foundation of rock and pop and other genres. Some people love clean vocals, but some will want more of that foundation, that underlying bass that you need on rock and EDM and pop. That groove foundation that you hear on other sets that aren't so relaxed in the mid-bass. Mystic 8 is really on the edge of where it sounds perfectly neutral unless you listen to genres that need a bit more right in that area. And I think that's what is really hard to understand what this was going to sound like, or maybe it's easy to understand what it's going to sound like. You just know that there isn't going to be a heavy mid-bass presence. It's there, but it's not going to be, and kind of roll right into the impact and the tactility of the bass. This is really kind of a lowered, relaxed shelf, so it really was not a distraction. It's not noticeable. It sort of accompanies the mids as it should, but it doesn't necessarily stand out on its own. It's definitely not a bass-led set. Even if you're listening to genres that are bass-led, I don't think that's really going to be a good match. This set really is focused on the mids, and this was really meant to be a perfect accompaniment to it, but not necessarily to sound, as impactful as other sets would. And even the other sets like EJ07M or S08 or I don't know, I think there's probably even S12. I think those had more impactful, more presence on the bass shelf, and I think this one was just really tuned to really keep the focus and the attention on the mids, and I think it actually does that quite well. But again, this all comes down to how you prefer that style neutrality, and will this match to the genres and the and your music library, and how that all fits together. That is the decision point, is exactly how I would say it on Mystic 8. So one of the things that I noticed about Mystic 8, and it's an 8BA set, and balanced armatures, they do have this quickness to them. They don't sound quite as warm or as bodied as dynamic drivers. And I will say that a tube amp will be the upgrade to this style of set in 8 balanced armatures in a neutral style tuning. The tube timbre, the tonality, the texture over Mystic 8's precise balanced armatures is really that blend of analog precision. It really gave this a really nice organic analog style sound to it. And then you combine that with the precise balanced armatures that they add to it. And I thought it was a very, very beautiful combination. Plus, you're going to get more tails and trails and space around the instruments, and that really enhances what BAs can do, but not as present in this style tuning. And just in particular to this style set, I think it actually adds quite a bit, because they didn't necessarily boost any of the upper treble. You don't have a huge amount of air. You don't have a huge amount of space around instruments and sounds. And this was one way to kind of give you that space and that presence around, have instruments feel like they actually do have space around them, do have more decays, do have more trailing off of notes. I think all of those things were sort of amplified in a tube amp and brought forward more so than my solid state amp. So I think especially on this one, always you would take a balanced armature set and say, well, it needs a nice source. In this particular way, in this style tuning with these particular drivers, I would say this tube style is actually quite an upgrade or a great match and synergy to what Mystic 8 is about. And the sound, what does this one sound like? It sounds like Tori Amos on the piano. Very dynamic, very emotional, kind of those ethereal vocals, 8 high-quality balanced armatures tuned to put you in the room with transparency, resolve, and dynamics. And she has an album called The Piano Collection. It's a couple hours of her playing the piano and singing the way she does, and really, really a perfect match for what Mystic 8 is really, really good at. Female vocals, analog instruments, your typical real instruments. I think electronics don't really match this style of tuning all that well, but when you get into the things that our ears recognize as organic or analog or natural sounding, I think that is exactly where Mystic 8 stands apart. And Tori Amos on piano, pretty much what I listened to the most on this set. I certainly tried lots and lots of other genres, but I actually went back to the piano collection because it's actually really fantastic on this set. So the bass shelf, again, not surprising if you've heard Cadenza or other Cadenza 4 or other LETSHUOER sets. They tend to do a quality over quantity. There was really an intention to hit a neutral level on this one, so the vocals shine, never overstep, never to distract, and I think that's exactly what I talked about on that bass shelf. For people who are really into bass, it's gonna sound kind of recessed, I guess. It's not forward, it's just there as an accompaniment, and I think that's going to turn some people off. For people who don't necessarily care as much about bass and just need it there to fill in where it should, that's exactly what they did. I mean, the guy who tuned this obviously was looking for the mids presentation on this one and just wanted the bass to accompany that and make it sound as natural as it could. And that's what he did. But as far as bass-led genres, it really doesn't do that. And I think that is the downside, is that the bassier popular genres won't be a match for this set. it's the least expressive part of this tuning. I mean, he basically chose no distractions over tactility. So even on Cadenza 4, there was some tactility to the bass. It had a really nice dynamic driver, and if you bump it up a little bit, it became a little bit more tactile. But it did have that feeling that there was something being hit. And this one, they sort of pushed that into the background and smoothed it over, and it's just a very relaxed version of bass. And I still say the quality is actually pretty good, but if you're looking for the tactility of it, that sounds like something is being hit, like a kick drum, it doesn't necessarily do that all that well. The upside of it is LETSHUOER tends to keep the bass levels lower to avoid pushing treble levels. No difference here. That is exactly what it sounds like. There's a really tight balance at both ends, the sub bass and the air region, so everything can be heard in between, but the treble has more of a spotlight than the bass here. Again, I think everything from the mids up was the spotlight, the emphasis, where the attention was put into the tuning. The bass sort of was the accompaniment. It is the part that just made everything sound right, but not necessarily an equal player in all three of them. So the mids, again, Mystic 8 is really all about the mids. It loves vocals and instruments over electronics, like I said. More so than other sets, this is really that precise playback reproduction engine and a little bit less musicality. Again, neutral style sets, sometimes you can get some musicality out of it, sometimes you can't. This one, again, it leans that there is some musicality to it, but I would still say it is very, very good at playback and reproduction of music. Not a sterile analytical tonality at all, but the kind of set that sounds like a singer occupies space in your head. There's a realism and dimension that creates an illusion of the stage and the person singing, and it's really, really well done in that style of music. There's no peaks, no wonky timbre to snap you out of that illusion. It is just a very, very nice set to listen to music being played back or reproduced. Mystic 8's black background will be intoxicating for some. I think for me, I love that black background. It's the ultimate transparency to the mids. Or it's going to be that illusion breaker for others, right? Some people, again, it kind of goes back to the bass shelf and how you prefer that mid-bass foundation to your music library. Either you're going to notice it's missing, or you're going to say the vocals are perfect. You're probably going to fall on either one side of the fence or the other. It's right on the line of where you would want thicker, more resonance to the bottom of the stage. And that's exactly what happens with it's like you can listen to it and say, well, I love that background. I love how the vocals pop. I love how clear they are, how transparent they are, but I'm kind of missing that foundational groove to my rock. It just doesn't, some genres just aren't going to sound right with all of that black background, but I like the black background, so it doesn't really bother me, but I know some people are going to notice that you may want it thicker to have more resonance to the bass, to have a more depth to the bass. I think all those things are related to how they tune the bass shelf. And more so other parts where you say, damn, this thing sounds really amazing. Right in the mids, I think it's really hard not to be amazed at what the vocals sound like on this, especially female vocals. They are quite stunning to look at, to hear on an 8 balanced armatures with really nice tuning, really nice drivers. It does make you pay attention and say this thing can play back some really amazing tracks. But like other neutrals, it can be amazing, like I just said, but not necessarily engaging. And think about a listening room versus a club and how you listen to music in those two style places. That's kind of exactly what happens with Mystic 8. Mystic 8 is that listening room where you kind of sit down, the guy puts on Rebecca Pigeon's, Spanish Harlem, and you think, wow, that is amazing playback of that. She sounds just like she's in front of me. I'm hearing every nuance in her voice. It sounds perfect. That is the Mystic 8 experience, but that's not as engaging as you would get into a club where you're like, well, I'm not too worried about the nuance in her voice, but I'm worried about how the bass hits me or how I'm engaged by the upper electronic music and higher frequencies. These two styles of listening are very different. And Mystic 8 is very much, I will say, it's this playback, this reproduction, this listening room style playback is really what Mystic 8 does quite well. And on the treble, mostly what I expected, but it's a little bit harder to tell from the graph. I think LETSHUOER has a great ear for resolve without boost, and that's kind of exactly what you get here. Mystic 8 is very resolving in a natural way, not an analytical tech set. The difference is those sharp edges and the sharp transients, right? Mystic 8 follows more of a Sonian feathered edge, more diffuse, and that's also why it's a stunning vocal set. Those of you who love those super sharp edges, I think Afol Cantor, I thought that one had amazingly sharp analytical style edges. That's not what this is. This is definitely a nice resolving treble, but it's in support of beautiful style vocals. So you're not going to get some of those harder edges, which maybe sound a little bit less natural, probably sound a little bit less natural to the guy who tuned the set. So he went a little bit softer on the edges and put in kind of more nuance and more texture into the mids. And that's exactly how I would describe Mystic 8. But again, the black background, the lowered sub bass, it really allows Mystic 8 to extend naturally, have a softer edge, but not really lose the resolve or the textures. That's kind of exactly what happens here. And if you think about it, how it worked end to end, this tuning actually really does make quite a bit of sense. Do you need a resolving source for it? Yep, that really helps. Lower, medium, plus volume, it can really do both. And you sort of know that sets are tuned quite well when you turn them down and you're like, oh, that still sounds quite good. And then you turn it up and keep turning it up and it still sounds good. This one actually volume scales quite far down and quite far up. And, you know, depending on the track you're listening to, it actually can be quite a high volume set if that's your thing. But even at low volume, I thought it was very, very enjoyable just because of its focus on neutrality and the mids. And I think it does that really, really well, even at lower volume. The stage, again, quite 3D. And if you poke in some mid bass with EQ, it'll be more depth. And the depth is going to be the hardest part of the stage on this particular set for kind of obvious reasons, because the mid bass level is a bit down. And for me, mid bass tends to give you a little bit more front to back depth. And I actually do think this one does have depth kind of right out of the box without really doing anything to it. But I think that's the weakest, or at least the dimension that is probably a little bit more shallow than the width and the height, or at least that was more noticeable. It definitely will go behind the ear, but not necessarily behind your head like some other sets if you had a little bit more mid-bass to it. So that is what I got on Mystic 8. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.